next speaker is Dr. Doug Guthrie, Dean of GW School of Business, Professor of International Business and Professor of Management. He's very well known in the world of higher education. He's commented on and written about MOOCs in higher education often.
It's great to see such a packed house for a discussion of what I think is such an important topic, and really was framed in the right way by the Provost. I have to, before I start, give a couple of caveats because it's a little bit odd for me to be standing up here talking about online education. I actually forced myself to teach a course, the first time I'd ever taught a course just recently, so that I wouldn't have this crisis of legitimacy when I would sit up here and talk about online education. But it is actually something that I had thought a lot about. 3 years ago today, I was a professor at a different university, and it was one of those universities that I thought sort of had its head in the sand on this revolution. And there were lots of universities at that time that were saying, this stuff that these downstream for-profit phoenixes of the world are doing, this has nothing to do with us. Don't worry about it. We don't need to invest in this space. And then there were some of us saying, yeah, but what about 20 years from now? What about when these people have been experimenting with the technology? What about when an entire generation of students have grown up with very different ways of interacting and their preferences being catered to over this thing called the internet? What was it going to be like then? Would we have missed a huge opportunity that was going to be a crisis point for us? And so I came to this university and was lucky enough to step in as dean at a school that had been thinking about this very deeply. And some of the things that I started to immediately learn are from some of the people in this room. Several of the GWSB faculty are here. I just want to mention three that have been really instructive for me. As soon as I got here, I started talking with Neil Cohen, who was very, very passionate about online education. And he said to me something once that has stuck with me ever since and has really instructed what I have tried to figure out going forward. And his position was, this isn't just something that we do as a second-class substitution for face-to-face. There are ways, if you strip down the courses and introduce an entirely new pedagogy, that it can be better. And I thought, I've never heard that before. How can it actually be better than being face-to-face with somebody and interacting in a small seminar setting? But I took it and filed it away, and we talked for many more times about this. And then about 18 months ago, I asked Phil Wirtz to lead a committee that just sort of assessed everything that we did and made some recommendations. Now, the provost is not here, and so I will take the liberty of saying that actually, when you are, it's very nice to think about higher education as a not-for-profit thing, and we're only worried about the product, but as a dean, you feel real pressures. And so when Phil came back to me and said, actually, we got to keep these classes small, I was like, no, there's such a big revenue opportunity here. But over the course of the last year and a half, I've become convinced that this is actually right, because what we are interested in here is education in the best way that we can. We are not interested in textbooks. And that's the thing that's really interesting here. Provost Lerman made the analogy with textbooks as a potentially disruptive technology. I would take that analogy one step further. MOOCs are textbooks. They are not disruptive technology. They are not going to change the world. They are a way of delivering education that is the next evolution of packing something in and giving knowledge. But that is not education. The heart of education is interactivity and community building. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. The one final person I want to call out is Liesl Riddle, who's our Associate Dean of Graduate Programs here, and she's really been the architect of implementing everything that we've been doing here. So all the stuff I'm going to show you today is really a collective effort on what it is that we're doing. Now, I kind of came into this about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and we started thinking about it right away. What is it that we're doing? We actually, in the business school, had this nice laboratory in place because we had these 3 programs that we're already doing online, actually using 3 different modes of delivery. So it kind of gave us an interesting laboratory to say what's working, what's not, how can we take this another step forward. So as we were going in a very, very measured and slow process of building this out, the world became obsessed with MOOCs suddenly. It was MOOCs everywhere. And, you know, if I would have been a more patient person, I would have just gone about my business and ignored the newspapers. But every time I picked up the New York Times and read about MOOCs, I got more and more annoyed. And then I got the most annoyed when Teresa Sullivan had her run-in with the trustees at UVA. I don't know if you remember the details of that case. But she has her run-in with the trustees, and essentially it was about online education. It was about the fact that she didn't have a strategy, and they thought she was a stick in the mud and she wasn't being innovative. So they fire her, she gets hired back, and then the next thing you know, the problem is solved because she signs up with Coursera and they're doing MOOCs. And I was just like, what is going on? Have these people lost their minds? This is not what is actually the thinking that needs to go into creating great education. And so what we have done, and what we're going to show you a little bit of, is really built around these three core concepts. It's built around interaction, it's built around community building, and it's built around customization. And this is the last piece. This is sort of the holy grail that I'm going to hold out there that we're still struggling with. But this is what Neil Cohen was talking about when we started talking about this 3 years ago. So I'm going to take you through some of what it is that we're doing. But before we do this, I just want to explicitly address the issue of disruption. Okay, this, of course, is an allusion to Clay Christensen's work. Clay Christensen actually is very dour on higher education. And maybe he should be. We are very slow to change institutions. But here again, I would note that I actually disagree with the Provost on this point. I do think we are at a disruptive and transformative moment, but it is not MOOCs that are the transformer. It's the internet, it's distance education, and it's big data. Those are the things that are transformative moments for us. The MOOCs may be a tiny part of it. They may be the new type of textbook that really plays a role here, but they have nothing to do with the transformation in and of themselves. I think that takes us to a really interesting question. What is it that we're talking about here? If we're just talking about teaching and learning, you know, of course, textbooks are a good thing for delivering knowledge. And of course, MOOCs can probably do that as well. But if we're talking about education, we're talking about something much deeper. We're talking about something that has to do with cultivation. Now, here is where I disagree with the Provost a little bit, is that if he's making the case that that cultivation, that rearing, has to happen in a face-to-face setting, I'm not sure if that's true. It might be true for some people, but there is an opportunity for interactivity at distance, and actually we are seeing that with the programs that we're doing, and more people will tell you that they have had better interaction with their professors in the online space than they have in the face-to-face space, right? And so interaction isn't based on sitting in front of somebody's face and being able to read their facial expressions, but it is a fundamental part of education in some form or another. And we really believe this. We believe that that's at the heart of education. Now, the Provost was actually very modest because he has been somebody who has thought a lot about this at MIT, at his previous institution, for many, many years. But today, when you put MIT up and talk about educational innovation, people immediately think, oh yeah, you're talking about MOOCs. Actually, that's not where MIT has been most innovative in education. Where they've been most innovative in education, and actually in this very setting about a year and a half ago, Carl Wyman talked about this issue of how basically MIT was leading the world in abandoning large-scale lecture courses. Even in Physics 101, where you have to teach 300 students, they had come to the conclusion that this is not how people learn. The open people's head and pour knowledge in approach to learning was not working. So that's really interesting because that gets to a specific issue about why I was so annoyed about the MOOCs. Why are we so impressed with teaching 100,000 people at once? Why is that interesting? That doesn't mean that you're actually teaching and that education is actually happening. It's more like TV and radio. You can reach, you can broadcast, and you can hit 100,000 people, maybe even 1 million people at once, but does that have anything to do with the process of education? And I would argue it has very little to do with it. Now, I want to show you a little bit in a couple of snippets about what it is that we've been up to, and then take you through exactly what we mean by these three core concepts that are at the heart of education: interaction, community, and customization.
The George Washington School of Business Digital Community is a branded platform providing the distance student a variety of online degree programs as well as an innovative co-curricular program. Building on the entrepreneurial efforts of GWSB faculty who helped pioneer the online learning space, the digital community carries forward that spirit of innovation. Through cutting-edge technology and a library of digital teaching resources, we are creating a vibrant, connected community of learners around the globe. The GWSB digital community challenges massive open enrollment course experiments that are fashionable at some universities. We believe that these one-way standardized learning modules do not foster meaningful educational environments. They merely create a crowd without the loyalty, initiative, and interest to establish deep learning relationships. The GWSB digital community strives to create interactivity and specialized learning on the internet, bridging geographic divides and promoting meaningful learning relationships between faculty and students and among students themselves. GWSB has partnered with Pearson, the world's largest learning company, to provide the necessary resources and consulting services to help faculty build their courses.
I love that animation picture because like the MOOCs guys have no eyes and no, you know, they can't see, and so somehow they really drove the point home. They got what we were saying. So that kind of introduces you to what the philosophy is. But now let me take you through these 3 key points and just talk about them a little bit and then show you a little bit more about what's on the back end of what it is that we're trying to do. So 3 core values of education. Interaction. I just don't think we can get beyond this one. I personally think that education is about interaction from faculty to students or teachers to students and amongst students. You just can't truly be educating people unless you are understanding what they're struggling with, understanding how the learning process is going, and then adjusting what you do in teaching in accordance with that. Now, we've always known as educators that it's a very different learning experience to teach a seminar than it is to teach a lecture. And the larger the lecture, the more difficult it is to get to students. So here again comes the analogy of, or the issue of what's impressive about teaching 100,000 people. Sure, we can broadcast knowledge to 100,000 people, but are you actually teaching them? Are you actually understanding what they're struggling with? Are you actually putting them together with people who can help them learn through that process? And my answer would be the larger the population, the less you're able to do that. So we have to build in interactivity into this system. Now, people will come back and say, well, you know, okay, let's set aside the problems that the MOOCs are actually having in terms of a business model, but what you're talking about is not scalable. My answer is yes, okay? It's not scalable to the extent that we could generate lots of revenues and lots of profits the larger the classes we take. The number that Phil came back to me with about 1.5 years ago in his report that I initially resisted was about a magic number of something like 40. It's actually fits quite well with the idea of how seminar settings and lecture settings work. And the issue is just really faculty time. You have to be able to interact, and you have to have small enough classes in which people feel that you are interacting with them and that you're understanding their learning experience, both the successes and the challenges that you're facing. Now, I don't know if 40 is the magic number. We have some classes in our online healthcare MBA program that are much larger than that, and they're broken out into sections. There are certainly ways to scale the business, but the key thing is we cannot get away from interactivity. It has to be a part of the educational experience. Now, one of the things that you're going to see is we try to build this into our model. So we try to do it both virtually, and so when we're going to show you what the back end looks like, we have it set up. These are actually a professor with actors, student actors, and they basically go through the process of learning in a way that makes you feel like you're a part of a very small group. You're sitting at this seminar table, okay? In addition, we believe that you must have a synchronous part, okay? You can't get away from the interaction. Now, that's hard. Okay, and that's actually something that's very different from us as a product. I was just this last weekend in Chicago talking with a bunch of deans about what we're doing in this space, and nobody else is really emphasizing this piece of it. But we believe that you've got to have it. The number that we're settling on is about 25%, and however people do it across time zones, you just got to do it. People have to interact with the people that they're teaching. We also believe in community. This idea that you can actually just be a person who's a data point on some distant space and not be interacting with your fellow students and only have a one-way direction of interaction with the professor is just not a good way of teaching and education. And so we really believe you can actually do this across great distance and across time zones, but you have to actually really engage with the community building process. This animation, they have eyes, you see, so they can all actually, they're all actually people. Now, this gets me to the piece that I think is the most exciting, and we're not there yet technologically. And I don't mean just us. I think that there's a new wave of technological innovation coming. And it has to do with customization. I don't know if you all remember the moment that you realized that Google was tracking every click you were making and customizing advertising to you. I remember it very well because it was a very scary Big Brother moment, and realizing, wow, these guys have so much information on me that they know that I bought a pair of Nike running shoes last week, and somehow, you know, I'm seeing Nike ads now. Like, this is a scary thing in some ways. But it is also the future. This is really where online education can be better, because every time you make a decision educationally, and every time it's tracked over the computer in ways that you cannot do just as a lecturer standing up here, we can then start to use algorithms to customize the learning experience to you. So we can take a lecture hall of 100 people, and if you have enough data and you build enough of the exercises into the learning experience to track that data, and then you have taught it enough times so you can start to build learning trees with those algorithms taking people in different directions, where Johnny is really struggling with this statistical concept, but Susie is really actually going out and has it down pat. They may start to head off in different directions, right? And so you can actually start to use the big data of the internet, of which there is a huge back end, to really customize the learning experience. So you transform a lecture experience where everybody's having one common experience into actually an interactive experience in which every individual's learning experience is customized right down to their level. So this is where I actually think that the Provost and I disagree, is this could disrupt this whole thing, right? It could be the case that sometime 50 years from now, learning might be better when we have all of the data and all of the technology and all of the algorithms built up. We're not there yet. And so I actually, and there is also, of course, the social part and the socialization part, and you know, particularly for 18 to 22-year-olds, I think that's going to continue to be important. But there is a future out there that is very, very different, but it's the opposite, in my view, of what MOOCs are really about. We have tried to build an infrastructure that starts this, right? So again, Liesl always gets nervous when I talk about this, because she always says, I hope you're not advertising that we're customizing down to the level of individual yet. We're not doing that. But we actually have an infrastructure that is going to eventually allow for it. So the way we work is we work with Pearson, and you're going to hear from Adrian in a few minutes. And they subcontract to an organization called In the Telling, which is they're very good at what they do, and they do a lot of the video and editing and the customization. And then what we actually do with that is we do this setting in which people feel like they're having an interactive seminar setting. Everything that they say is kind of transcribed so people can follow it at their own pace, and it's not dependent on how fast you can take notes. But then there's a possibility of building these exercises into each point of knowledge acquisition. And if we start to do that, and that becomes a standard pattern of how professors actually put into place what they're trying to teach, we can then be collecting data on every person and everything that we do, and we can start to build out those learning trees so that the algorithms can be automatic. Again, we're not quite there yet, but we will.
We all were sort of trained, we all went to college and it was all the same format. Well, you know, the experts say that one of the worst things you can do is lecture for an hour. That's like the worst way to deliver material to people. So it's time for us to let that go anyway. It's already kind of happening.
So this concept of sampling distribution is really very important.
Called Democracy in America by Alexis de Tocqueville. De Tocqueville was a Frenchman who was very much taken with what was going on in the United States at that time.
There are things like, is business ethics oxymoronic?
I think, yes, there is some self-interest, but it is about helping people. It is about helping them achieve their goals.
You've come a long way.
Do that again?
Yep, you've come a long way.
Okay, anytime you're ready.
And then I got to college and took advanced calculus, and it's not like anything.
I majored in calculus.
You majored in calculus?
For 3 years.
Whoa, is that right?
You know, I'm a believer, and I was a total skeptic.
I'll just point out that one of the added benefits here for faculty who have always been nerds all of their lives, you get to do your own outtakes, and so it's really, it's really good stuff. So where does the future lie? This customization piece is, I can't emphasize it enough. Now, this last fall, I kind of got into trouble because my annoyance hit a boiling point, and I shot off some article to the Chronicle of Higher Education, who thought they would take it, and they published it. And pretty soon I had Coursera and Udix and Udacity like emailing me, breathing down my neck, saying, "Who do you think you are? You're wrong about this." And actually, it was very interesting because some of them, as I got into dialogues with them, they said, "Actually, okay, you're right, but it's very expensive what you're suggesting, and therefore, we just aren't going to do it." And I was like, "Well, there you have it. Like, that's the difference between you guys and us." Right? It is going to be expensive. It's going to be hard. It's going to take hard work. You are going to have to convince faculty to strip down what they're doing and rebuild it pedagogically in an entirely new and different way. But what we're interested in is in delivering the best educational product to our students. We are interested in teaching, learning, and education. And if that's what it's going to require, that's what we're going to do. Now, the interesting thing about this moment for me was not just the big guys coming at us, but we started to hear from many startup companies that were like, "You're right. We're not quite there yet." We heard from a group called the Versal Group in San Francisco that is building an entirely new platform that's all about customization that's going to go into beta testing in June of this year. We heard from ETS about all of the things that they're doing on collecting data and customization through it. We heard from actually Echo 360 as well, which was an organization that was based purely on the film capture, the video capture approach to things. But recently they bought a company that was developed by a professor named Perry Sampson at the University of Michigan that was all about how to customize lectures around students' experiences and all about collecting data. And he took us through a lot of his things. He's actually a meteorologist. And he showed us this thing where in one of his exercises, he could, through a clicker system, he could have students answer a question, and all of their answers would appear up on the board. But even more than that, he could identify who each of those dots were that got the answer wrong and know that this is somebody that they have to really think about because they're not actually in step with what he's trying to teach and educate. And so it's just, I think that there is a whole new world out there, and I think it's really exciting. Once we build this treasure trove of data and start to build the algorithms that allow us to do what it is that we want to do in education, I think the future is bright and it's amazing. But I think it's going to depend on interaction, community, and customization. And it's going to be great. So thank you all, and let me turn it back to TV.